Well, let's get started. The National Audio Company is already an interesting place. They're the country's last and the world's largest manufacturer of audio cassette tapes. But if you couldn't guess from how we're dressed, Jaden and I are not here to listen to music. We're here for what lies beneath this factory floor. Now, I want to be clear, I didn't discover it.
I don't know this light was on before.
I wouldn't even say that I rediscovered it. Others knew that it was there. But when I found out about it, I just had to see it for myself. But since then, I haven't been able to think about our city's history in quite the same way. I want to make sense of this experience. And I want to share that feeling with you.
I gotcha.
But words can only take us so far. So, we're going back. And you're coming with us. To the very origin of Springfield itself. One more time. We're searching for the bottomless well of Water Street. Let's go back to the beginning. One day, a few years ago, I came across something odd in a 1909 issue of the Springfield Republican. In it, Martin J. Hubble, a local engineer and historian, wrote about something that seemed impossible.
Colonel John Polk Campbell donated 50 acres for the county seat and included in the deed a bottomless well, which I think is in East Water Street. Thomas J. Epperson told me that he and another man tied 2 bed cords together and let them down and did not touch the bottom. I once pumped 1 million gallons of water out of it in 72 consecutive hours, and it did not lower the well.
Although my first instinct was to dismiss this bottomless well as some forgotten urban legend, something told me that it merited further investigation. So I started with Hubble's description, and from that, I narrowed the well's location down to a stretch of East Water Street between Robertson and Jefferson Avenue. Then I hit a wall. I couldn't find any mention of a bottomless well on Water Street apart from Hubble's article, and I was beginning to think that I really had just fallen for some century-old hoax. But then I had an idea. This 1872 bird's-eye map of Springfield depicts many structures from that time. Could it have also included the well, or maybe a well house? What I found instead was the little blue ribbon of Jordan Creek running right alongside what would become Water Street. Duh, that's why it's called Water Street. But this raised the question, could the truth behind the bottomless well somehow be connected to Jordan Creek? So I searched our catalog for books about Jordan Creek, and I got to reading. And I quickly learned that the bottomless well that I had been searching for wasn't some old-timer's tall tale after all. It was real. And more than that, it was the very birthplace of the city of Springfield. I was familiar with the founding story of Springfield, how in 1829, John Polk Campbell discovered a cluster of springs along the bank of Jordan Creek and carved his initials into a nearby tree to stake his claim. In 1830, he returned and built his family homestead there, and the city of Springfield grew up around that site. But it had never occurred to me that one of these springs and the bottomless well could be one and the same. And maybe that's because the bottomless well wasn't really a well at all, and it wasn't a spring either. The bottomless well was, in reality, what's known as a karst window. This is a sort of natural opening in the ceiling of a cave that exposes a body of water below. This particular karst window sat in a limestone shelf sloping down to the banks of Jordan Creek, and was located just a few yards north of what is today Founders Park. When water was drawn from this opening, it was quickly replenished by the flow from elsewhere in the cave system, creating the illusion of an endless, bottomless water supply. Maybe it was this phenomenon that made John Polk Campbell decide to build his homestead here in 1830 at the site of what would come to be known as the Natural Well. The Natural Well supplied water for Springfieldians for decades to come, and was even considered as a potential source for the city's first public waterworks. That's where Martin Hubble comes in. In 1874, he really did pump nearly 1 million gallons of water out of the well in a test of its viability as a public utility. But in 1883, the city's first public waterworks was actually built elsewhere at Fulbright Spring, and as a result, the Natural Well fell into disuse. First, the limestone shelf in which the Natural Well set was quarried. Then, in the late 1920s and early 1930s, Jordan Creek was culverted to prevent flooding, and Water Street was essentially rebuilt on top of that culvert. Campbell's Bottomless Well, Springfield's birthplace, was effectively buried beneath the city that it gave rise to. But you already know that that is not how this story ends.
Yeah,
Did you walk across this or did you go down?
I went down.
Because in 1929, a new opening was created mere feet away from the site of the Natural Well.
Engineers engaged in erecting the McGregor warehouse on Water Street recently broke through a crust of stone into a large subterranean cave. It was discovered that the cavity was at least 23 feet deep and of unknown width. Power-driven hydraulic pumps were applied to the reservoir of water in the cavern, and after more than a half-hour steady pumping had lowered the water level only 1 inch, attesting to the enormity of the cave.
Despite initial concerns about structural integrity, that building went up and was used as a warehouse by the McGregor Hardware Company. And in 1998, it was purchased by the National Audio Company. So, is it the same cavern that was beneath the Natural Well? The honest answer is, maybe. The two features are almost certainly physically connected, the Natural Well being only about 150 feet east of this new opening. However, it's impossible to say with any certainty whether this new opening looks into the same cavern that was beneath the Natural Well, or if this is a separate cavern that is connected to the one beneath the Natural Well by a series of underground conduits running beneath Water Street. That opening is still here, at the southern end of this crawl space, and it's the closest that we can get today to the founding site of Springfield, Campbell's Natural Well. Except, is it really accurate to call it Campbell's Well, as if he were the one who discovered it? I mean, time doesn't begin in 1829 with Campbell standing over the Natural Well. Let's go back to the beginning. At the onset of the Ozarks' written history, this region was the home of the Osage people. However, as a result of the 1808 Treaty of Fort Clark, the Osage lost most of their land in the Missouri Ozarks. 10 years later, the southwest corner of Missouri was divided into land grants for 2 more indigenous groups, both of whom had been forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. The northern half went to the Kickapoo, originally from the southern Great Lakes region, and the southern half was set aside for the Lenape Delaware, who for centuries had resided in the Delaware River Valley and its surroundings. In the 1820s, these lands were legally the property of these indigenous groups. But that didn't stop some white settlers from the east from squatting in this region. 2 of these settlers were John Polk and Ezekiel Madison Campbell, 2 brothers in their 20s from Middle Tennessee. The Campbells set out for the Ozarks in 1829, but things went awry that fall when they found themselves at the mercy of one of the Ozarks' characteristic storms. Fortunately for them, they were not alone.
My father, John Polk Campbell, and my uncle, Ezekiel Madison Campbell, took refuge from an autumnal storm in Old Delaware Town on the James, not far from the Wilson's Creek battleground.
200 years ago, this piece of the James River Valley between Nixa and Clever was home to a sizable and cosmopolitan village in which the Delaware people lived between roughly 1820 and 1830. Today, we know it as Delaware Town. The Campbell brothers were not the only beneficiaries of the Delaware's hospitality at that time.
The Braves just brought in a remnant of Kickapoos, which they had rescued from the Osages. Among the Kickapoos was a young brave boy, ill with a kind of bilious fever, recently taken.
Apparently, after reading one book on botany, John Polk Campbell considered himself to be some kind of herbal healer. And so, he endeavored to treat the Kickapoo youth.
Not understanding the condition of his patient, he threw the Kickapoo into a frightful cold sweat and deathly sickness. Then there was work for dear life.
Miraculously, the Kickapoo boy survived. What happened next is one of the most pivotal events in Springfield's history. This Kickapoo boy offered to show the Campbell brothers a beautiful place not many miles north. They traveled up the James River, crossed the Kickapoo Prairie, and arrived here at what was once the site of a Kickapoo village just south of today's downtown Springfield. North of there, in the limestone bluffs hemming in Jordan Creek, was the karst window. And we know the story from there. John Polk Campbell builds his homestead near the site of the natural well and comes to be known as the founder of Springfield. In the early 1830s, facing growing pressure from white settlers, both the Kickapoo and the Delaware leave the Ozarks for newly negotiated lands near what would soon become Kansas City. We're nearly there now.
I wonder what this is. There it is. Show you a straight shot.
This is the culvert that opens up to the cavern. This is the opening. And this chamber below. Could this be the bottomless well of Water Street? Most likely, it is connected to it, but whether it's the same chamber or just another part of a more complex underground structure isn't a question that we can answer at this time. I joke that it's just a hole in the ground, but in reality, it feels more like a threshold between the present and the past. Even the rock that it sits in, limestone, tells a story about the deep time past of the Ozarks. One more time, let's go back to the beginning. Half a billion years ago, the Ozarks was the floor of a shallow sea, dotted with reefs teeming with animals such as crinoids, relatives of starfish. As these animals lived and died, they left behind the calcium in their bodies, slowly forming a thick layer of limestone. When you look at a piece of local limestone, it's easy to focus on the fossils, but the stone itself was once also part of a living thing. These lithified animal remains form the bedrock of the Ozarks. And over hundreds of millions of years, the flow of water has carved that limestone into valleys and bluffs, but also subterranean caves, hidden labyrinths upon which no light has ever shone. The bottomless well was here before Water Street was paved. And it'll be here when this building is gone, when Springfield is merely history. And it'll be here when that history is forgotten. But my hope is that today, at this particular opening into the dark, we've managed to keep just a little light shining. And, well, I suppose that's all we can do, isn't it?